Hey there, hope all is well. Back at you today with some more RTD News updates. And as you can tell from today's title, Venezuela Shuns the Tyranny of the Dollar, I'm going to cover 4 articles dealing with the recent events that's happened over the last 72 hours with the country of Venezuela removing the benchmark pricing for their oil from the dollar to the yuan, as well as a basket of currencies, and also get into how this is major news that I haven't heard much about on mainstream media, being that this is the first country that has actually come out publicly and done something that most countries in the past have learned a hard lesson from doing, which is to remove the pricing of oil from the dollar. And so we're going to talk about what type of ramifications there might be from that, as well as get your thought on how this will all play out in the days ahead as more nations begin to observe and to look at this historic move for this country. So, as always, I want to encourage you to click the RTD subscribe button for more interviews as well as updates, as well as take a time to visit the RTD University page, where I put together all my prior interviews dealing with things such as this and how important it is to begin rethinking the dollar in your own personal lives. So, let's dive into today's news. All right, so today, as I mentioned, I have 4 articles all dealing with various verbiage on how this whole thing is playing out with the dollar being removed from the benchmark pricing of the oil in Venezuela, as well as a recent event on the food crisis there and what they're choosing to do to try to implement some change or to add some more meat into the system. But before I get into those things, just want to talk about how important this really is for people to begin taking a true interest in events surrounding our national currency here in the United States of America. And so when you have a country that outright decides to do something that no other country has actually been successful with doing, and so the countries that I would refer to who've tried to do such things in the past are all countries where the leaders are no longer in power, and those countries are a complete mess, and those are predominantly Middle Eastern countries with Libya, Iraq, and of course Iran with the sanctions that they've been placing on them. And so this title itself, Shuns the Dollar because of the tyranny. There's going to be words of tyranny mentioned in here, but yet the United States government, bodies of our government, have really used the dollar to control and to manipulate and really make hard times for a lot of other countries if they didn't cooperate. And so my idea is that because of this sudden change over the last 72 hours, there might be some changes down the line where our government decides to either ramp up the sanctions that was passed a couple weeks ago or take it the next step further, which has happened in the past, which all ultimately paints a picture of some type of event where Maduro needs to be removed and then we go into Venezuela directly. So let's get into today's articles, and as always, I want to get your thoughts at the very end. And so the very first one here is from Sputnik.com, and it's entitled Venezuela's President Commits to Pricing Oil in Yuan to Counter U.S. Sanctions. And the next one here is from thedailystar.net, and it says Venezuela publishes oil prices in Chinese currency to shun U.S. dollar. And the next one here is from the Times of India, and it says Venezuela's new plan to beat hunger, it says to breed rabbits. And then the very last article here is from Merco Press, and it says Venezuela plans to abandon the dollar. Greenback currently sells for 22.4 Bolivar. So each article gives a different perspective and uses a little bit of different verbiage on how this whole thing is playing out. But yet between you have ditch, you have shun, you have the tyranny. And so I highlight a couple of things I want to pinpoint, all dealing with how this whole thing is unraveling. And it says Nicolas Maduro stated that Venezuela had already begun publishing prices for its oil in Chinese yuan in a bid to avoid the U.S. dollar and counter U.S. sanctions. And so this is over the weekend. It says Venezuela began publishing prices for oil. And this quote here says, "We are already pricing in Chinese yuan because of the sanctions which are facilitated by opposition politicians and which were adopted by the U.S. President Donald Trump. They have caused great damage, and we are forced to defend ourselves," Maduro said Friday in an announcement aired by the TV Telesur. So he's considered himself defending his economy by making this decision to remove the dollar from oil pricing. And just to give you more idea, it goes on to talk about recent events and how this all came about. But another thing that's interesting, it says Maduro has already said in the past that Venezuela was going to free itself from the vice of the dollar. And then it goes on and give you some more information about Chinese. But how it says here, we are forced to defend ourselves. So in Maduro's mind, here he's defending himself from the tyranny of the dollar, as you're going to read from other articles. And so the question is, how long will the U.S. allow this defense done by the Venezuelan president here to take place before something is done to counteract that. So let's move on to the very next one. And it says, Venezuela publishes oil prices in Chinese currency to shun U.S. dollar. And then the word Venezuela tyranny of the dollar. It says Venezuela published prices of oil and fuel in China's currency on Friday. It says it was called an effort to free the socialist-run country from the tyranny of the dollar, echoing a plan recently announced by Maduro. It says Maduro last week said his government would shun the dollar after the United States announced sanctions. It says a weekly oil ministry bulletin published on Friday listed September prices in Yuan, which includes prices from previous weeks and months in dollars. So starting in this current month here, their oil minister decided to begin pricing their oil in the Yuan. It says this format is the result of the announcement made on September 7th by President. The Venezuela will implement new strategies to free the country from the tyranny of the dollar, the ministry wrote. And then it gives you a price of idea what prices are at this current moment. Or as of Friday, it says the price barrel for the week ending Friday was 306.26 yuan, equivalent to 46.76 based on the exchange rate listed in a footnote. That is up from the previous weeks from 300.9 yuan or 46.15. And it says also another change is Venezuela's DICOM currency system on Wednesday temporarily suspended the sale of dollars in order to incorporate other currencies. And so that DICOM system is referring to an exchange mechanism they have there amongst, I think it's maybe two or others, so where they have different rates of exchange for the dollar for their local currency, whether it be for domestic use or international trade or whatnot. So it's different pricing. And of course, the Venezuelan people, of course, get the worst rate imaginable. And then the next one here, I think is, quite telling of how bad the situation really is when it comes to their overall economy, when it comes to food and things like that. It says Venezuela's new plan to beat hunger is to breed rabbits. It says Venezuela's government this week urged citizens to see rabbits as more than cute pets, as it defended a plan to breed and eat them, even as the opposition says this would do nothing to end chronic food shortages. And then here it says the rabbit plan is an effort by the government of President Maduro to boost food availability. Authorities also have taught citizens to plant food on roofs and balconies of their homes. So they call it the rabbit plan. So they're going to, breed rabbits to feed the people, as if enough rabbits to feed millions of people. But, that's their attempt to try to add some more food into the economy. And then the very last one here is from Merkel Press. And it says Venezuela plans to abandon the dollar. Greenback currently sells for 22.4 Bolivar. So it says to abandon the dollar. So give you an idea of what's going on here. It says Venezuela temporarily suspended the sale of U.S. dollars on its DICOM auction system following an announcement last week that it was moving away from the greenback in response to U.S. sanctions. It says President Maduro last week said the crisis-stricken OPEC country would create a basket of currencies to free Venezuela from the dollar. So basically here we have, a couple articles really highlighting, the situation there with the removal or the adjustment of the leading currency, which is our national currency, the Federal Reserve note, and its usage for oil, as well as probably down the line, they're going to probably go to a couple other things as the world begins to shift and rethink the dollar, aka the Federal Reserve note. Just a matter of time before, the recent events with the Russian ruble and yuan situation out east, with the whole idea of pricing oil, futures contracts moving forward in the yuan backed by gold. Then we have a president here, Maduro, which is in a country right now that's not too far from us, which is a heavy oil country. It's the third leading oil producer on the planet. And so my question would be, how much longer before, other nations that are heavily dependent upon the Federal Reserve note, which is pretty much all countries, begin to just observe the actions taken by the Far East countries as well as this country before there's probably the second nation or the third nation, or even worse, more nations, join a union themselves to basically say we're going to remove this Federal Reserve note, aka the dollar, altogether, to where they become more countries than our government would be willing to withstand. But yet at that point, we couldn't really do what we have done in the past, which is to, create some type of, false flag or some type of event, which would force us to then have to go into those countries to remove those presidents. And so just a matter of time before this thing probably grows even more. And then the thing would be, how would this affect you and I? So this basically says that, we wouldn't be able to continue to manipulate and to create and to really increase our monetary base without there being some type of ramifications of increased inflation, which is inevitable because as all these dollars that they're rejecting, they need somewhere to go. And then unfortunately, they're going to come back to their maker, which is the Federal Reserve Bank and our United States government here in America. And we, the people who are dependent upon saving and using and investing with this national currency, will be the ones that will start to feel the effects of an increased money supply, as well as just other types of ramifications that would not be very comfortable, talking about pensions, talking about just typical retirement things. And so those are all things to really consider with this. And so other than that, just want to shine some light on what's happening in Venezuela and get your take on the situation. Do you see this becoming just an isolated event, or could this ramp up to reach other countries and then create a real problem for us? And then also, next question will be, how will the United States government respond with this pretty much an attack or an assault on our national interest? As like a lot of politicians like to say that, you know, our national security is at risk now, meaning that they're not wanting to accept our fiat currency / debt. And so other than that, I just wanted to leave this with you guys, give you something to think about, and let you know what's happening on around you with the Federal Reserve note, and how this is eventually going to lead to something a lot greater as the rest of this year unfolds, as well as we head into the new year, where more of my guests as well as other commentators are really predicting that there's going to be a lot of events happening with the financial markets and currency markets that's going to really cause people to unfortunately be forced to wake up, because there'll be no way of avoiding it. So other than that, hope all is well. Look forward to bringing you more news. Thanks.